Hey everyone, I'm Cory Cortez with Fiscal Change Management. Today we're going to be talking about Cvc-Vac, how it's going to impact your departments, and give everyone the opportunity to ask questions. You all should be seeing our Menti question. What is something you like on your bucket list? To start today's call, I'm going to ask everybody to go to www.menti.com, either on their phones or on their computers, and type in the code 784675. And then from there, we'll be able to answer the question, what is on your bucket list? We are going to be using Menti at the beginning of the call, and then at the end of the call to get some feedback. Today's town hall is going to be a little bit different from what you might be used to from our previous town hall structures. So we'll get more into what it's going to be like in a little bit. I just want to make sure everybody feels free to ask questions at any time, and we're going to loop you in wherever we are in the presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and switch to what people are responding. Run a marathon? I always feel like there are people that run marathons and then people that don't. And I always admire the people that do, because I'm definitely one of the people that don't. Let me go ahead and respond myself. Just so everybody knows, in the announcement box, you'll be able to see links to helpful content that we will be referencing throughout today's town hall. You'll also be able to see the Menti code in case you miss it, since this is one of the slides that has it. It'll be there so that way you can answer questions later. This living in a remote location feels much more possible now than it ever really has. And I think from the amount of vacationing that we all went into, I think it's very much time to do so. I'm with all of you 100% on travel. I think this is everyone's dream. You know, sometimes when the lottery gets really high, I play it just to think about it all day. Okay. So before we get into it, I'm going to introduce everyone on the call. Like I said, I'm Cory Cortez from Fiscal Change Management. I'm here today with Breanna Lee. Bree.
Hi everyone, I'm Breanna, and Cory and I are on change management team.
Yeah, we have our entire SEO Fiscal subject matter expert group. Today they'll be available to answer questions. And so as we get started, like I said, this is going to be a little bit different of a call because we're going to go more into a flexible, like very calm Q&A session between Breanna and I. And you'll be able to answer or ask questions at any time throughout. Okay, so first I'd like to give everyone a brief refresher of what Cvc-Vac is, have a chat about it, and then throughout you'll have the opportunity to ask questions to our SMEs. I'll hand it off to Breanna now to give the overview.
Thanks, Cory. So, hi everyone, I'm Breanna again, and I'll be giving a brief overview on what the Cvc-Vac functionality is. So what this functionality is that when it's activated for your department, when you're transacting in Fiscal, Cvc-Vac will automatically validate that your department has enough fund cash and appropriation authority to complete your transactions. So you can see cash validation is CV, and it validates the cash for a fund at the time of payment, and cash validation appropriation control, Cvac, validates the authority at the appropriation level. And if you want kind of like another high-level overview of what the functionality is, we do have a video on the Fiscal YouTube channel that you can watch. It's a short 3-minute video. We also want to note that if your BU has a shared fund, then those funds will be set to track with and not control. What track with is that in Fiscal, it tracks that there's enough fund cash and appropriation authority to complete the transaction, but doesn't prevent your transaction activity from going through. And this is in difference to what control is. Control prevents your department and user from completing a transaction if your department doesn't have enough fund cash or appropriation authority. The Cvc-Vac budget check will raise an exception. And wanted to let everybody know that all shared funds are set to track with until all of the departments that participate in that fund are activated to Cvc-Vac control. The Cvc-Vac budget checks are powered using a new KK ledger that is similar to existing ledgers, and exceptions will occur if there's insufficient fund cash or appropriation authority, or if no budgets exist in Fiscal for Cvc-Vac ledgers.
Okay. All right, so let's get right into it.
Sounds good.
What does it mean for department to be set to Cvc-Vac control?
What this means is that today, all the departments on the call create a transaction in Fiscal, and that's sent to SCO for processing. If SCO determines that there isn't enough fund cash or appropriation authority to complete that transaction, then they void the transaction and your department is notified. When Cvc-Vac is activated in Fiscal for your department, it will automatically validate that your department has enough fund cash and appropriation authority to complete the transaction.
And what happens if a department doesn't have enough fund cash or appropriation authority?
If they don't, then the Cvc-Vac budget check will create an exception.
That sounds like an NSF that departments would see from SCO today.
Yes, the validation that happens in SCO Legacy now is going to be happening upfront in Fiscal.
Is there any change to the existing NSF process?
There are no changes, but this Cvc-Vac check is in addition to that.
Okay. And it looks like we have a question about shared funds. What if the shared fund administrator is not in Fiscal, like DMV? Will it be set to track with?
Yes, this is Wendy from the Cvc-Vac team. The answer to that question is yes, it would be set as track with.
Okay, thank you. Go on to our next question now. Okay, well, departments should be pretty familiar with NSS from SCO. let's get into some specifics of Cvc-Vac and Fiscal. When a department has a Cvc-Vac exception, where in Fiscal can departments go to view those exceptions?
Departments can go to view their exceptions using the Cvc-Vac exception dashboard in Fiscal. And what this dashboard is it's a page that shows a consolidated list of errors by exception type. And it also has links to documentation that end users can reference to help guide them on what next steps they should take on those exceptions.
For the dashboard, can any Fiscal user access it, or do you need a special role?
All Fiscal end users have access to the dashboard, but users that have the proper roles are actually able to drill down to the transaction details and make corrections if necessary. For example, if there was an exception that occurred in AP, if the end user had an AP role, they'd be able to look at the transaction details and decide what next steps to take.
If a user is looking for more information on Cvc-Vac, where would they go?
Users can refer to Job Aid Fiscal 461, which Cory mentioned earlier. We have links to it in the announcement chat bar. And they can also watch our Cvc-Vac exception dashboard navigation video that we created. That's on our Fiscal YouTube channel.
Okay. We don't want users to have exceptions, so to help them, where can Cvc-Vac users go to check their balances to make sure they have enough to complete a transaction?
To check their balances, end users can use the commitment control page and make sure that they use the CC_CV ledgers.
When exceptions do occur, who is responsible for fixing it?
It depends on the type of exception. What departments are going to be responsible for doing is checking the Cvc-Vac exception dashboard daily, correcting any department user errors, and resolving any true NSF Cvc-Vac exceptions.
And just to clarify, what are true NSF Cvc-Vac exceptions?
True non-sufficient fund or NSF Cvc-Vac exceptions occur when your department doesn't have sufficient fund cash or appropriation authority as shown by both SCO Legacy and Fiscal to complete a transaction. Transactions that have true NSF exceptions raised on them won't interface to SCO Legacy until they've been corrected by the department.
And when we talk about true NSF exceptions, that implies that there are other exceptions. What are those?
Yeah, so there are other exceptions that departments should be aware of, but we wanted to note that they aren't responsible for resolving these. SCO and Fiscal are responsible. And these exceptions are usually caused due to timing differences. For example, if a transaction had posted in one system but not yet interfaced to another, or when balances don't match between Fiscal and SCO Legacy.
What should departments do if they see those types of transactions?
If they do see those types of exceptions on those transactions, then what they can do is create an FSC ticket with the Fiscal Service Center and make sure that they include their DOF analysts on that to keep them in the loop.
Will Fiscal notify departments if there are any Cvc-Vac exceptions?
Fiscal will notify departments in certain cases. They'll notify the department whenever their voucher workflow is reset due to an exception that has occurred during the AP pay cycle. They will also notify your DOF analyst if they see an exception that is caused by a user error that requires end user action to fix. And we wanted to remind departments that they do have the ability to check for Cvc-Vac exceptions themselves using the dashboard. And we recommend that they do so on a daily basis as they won't be notified of all exceptions.
Some departments have been using Cvc-Vac for quite a while. What are the most common exceptions that we've seen so far?
Yeah, so we have seen some common exceptions among departments. The first one are exceptions that are due to timing differences between Fiscal and SEO legacy, but these exceptions are usually resolved after the nightly batch process has run. Another type of exception are true NSF exceptions when departments have no remaining spending authority or RSA available for a transaction in either SEO legacy or Fiscal. And the last type of common exception are journal vouchers that were created with accounting dates that were not in the same fiscal year as the original voucher.
That's all some good tips for departments, and I think departments should be using those and thinking about that in order to limit their exceptions. I know we don't want a backlog of exceptions for any department, so how long do departments have to resolve their Cvc-Vac exceptions?
Departments have within a week to resolve their Cvc-Vac exceptions. The Cvc-Vac budget check will also reoccur nightly to see if there's any new available fund cash or appropriation authority to clear exceptions.
What happens if a department is not able to resolve their exceptions within a week?
If they're unable to resolve their exceptions within a week, then departments will receive an email from Fiscal notifying them that Fiscal will be taking action on their behalf to either reverse or unpost the transaction.
I think that covers the basics of Cvc-Vac.
Yeah, I think if departments understand those basics, then they should be in a good spot.
And before we go into some more details, we have a question from the audience. So the question is, please clarify how Fiscal determines NSF for non-appropriated fund act. I think that might be something we're about to get into.
Yep, it looks like it.
Yes, and this is Wendy again. If it's referring to when they say non-appropriated fund, if the department is referring to the fixed charges appropriation, which doesn't have a budget, those will be set as track with.
Okay. Let's get into some more details that may impact specific departments. I know a few departments are part of the Cash Management Investment Act, or CMIA. How are CMIA departments impacted by Cvc-Vac?
CMIA departments were previously contacted by Fiscal to provide their CMIA appropriations, and Fiscal contacted them because they wanted to make sure that those appropriations were correctly configured to track with in the Cvc-Vac ledgers.
And we already talked about this a little bit, but I just want to make sure everybody's clear on what track with is.
Yeah, so track with in Fiscal tracks that there's enough fund cash and appropriation authority, but doesn't prevent a department's transaction activity from going through. So transactions that are set to track with shouldn't raise Cvc-Vac exceptions, but they do have the potential to raise errors in SEO legacy due to NSF. And in order to avoid these potential NSFs, departments should remember to process their federal drawdowns in a timely manner.
All useful information. For departments that have federal drawdowns, when should they process them?
It's up to the department's discretion when they want to process them, but they should time it so that those funds are available when the expenditure occurs. And for help determining the timing, departments can refer to Job Aid Fiscal 461. But one general tip that Fiscal has is just to always keep your federal drawdowns current.
Is there anything else departments should know about federal drawdowns?
Yeah, another thing that they should know is related to AR deposits. So AR deposits that use DLC location code need to be reclassified from program 9998 to true programs in order for them to workflow to SEO for approval. Fiscal is going to be working on a future enhancement that will automatically approve these transactions, but in the meantime, the SEO approvers are making sure that they prioritize the drawdown deposits so that they're timely processed and available.
Okay. Let's get to some questions from the audience. So the first question we have is, please clarify how new journal voucher can be posted within the same fiscal year as the original transaction if the accounting period from the original transaction is closed, let's say 2 years ago.
I think I want to clarify on that. That was on screen number, I think page number 10. So that bullet about journal voucher is actually that's referring to when department is creating a journal voucher to perform a department level chart field reclassification for a reverted appropriation. So in that case, since you are reclassifying to a department level chart field, you need to have the same accounting date as the original journal voucher. I mean, the original voucher.
Okay. So let's get into the next question. I apologize if this question was already addressed, but what's the difference between Cvc-Vac and budget checking in Fiscal?
Hi, this is Tone. So it's just another layer of budget checking. So before you would budget check against CC ledger, now you also budget check against the CV ledger.
And is that the difference between modified accrual and cash basis?
Yes. So cash basis, modified accrual is CC ledger, and cash basis is CV ledgers.
Okay. We'll go on to our next question now. If a department does not schedule out their federal draw to the ultimate program, will it affect their AP voucher Cvc-Vac budget check?
Yes, it will. If a drawdown is required, departments should make sure that they reclassify from program 9998 to true programs in a timely manner. If they don't do that, then transactions will go into Cvc-Vac exception and their payment will ultimately be delayed.
Is there anything else departments should be aware of?
One more thing they should be aware of is that when they're in the commitment control amount page, they should make sure that they select the correct commitment control amount and also select the actuals, recognize, and collect radio button.
Thanks for covering federal drawdowns. On another note, many departments use PFA. What should departments be aware of to avoid potential PFA-related Cvc-Vac exceptions?
So one of the reasons that we've seen for PFA-related Cvc-Vac exceptions is due to departments that were incorrectly following the PFA interim process.
On February 9th, 2021, part of the PFA interim process was automated. Could you give us a summary of the changes?
Yeah, so as you just said, PFA interim process was automated. And what this means is that PFA transactions that were initiated by paper TR transaction request interface the same night that they're posted in SEO Legacy.
That's great. It sounds like overall there will be less workload for departments.
Yeah, those are definite benefits from that enhancement. But while we're talking about it, I did want to give a few reminders related to the PFA interim process. The first reminder, which I'm sure departments will be happy to hear about, is they'll no longer have to create GL Journal spreadsheet upload files when following the process. They'll now only need to create an FSC ticket for PFA activity that was from fiscal year 2020 that was posted in Fiscal prior to September 14th, 2020, which was when the PFA interface phase 2 went live. And lastly, PFA activity that was from fiscal year 2019 and earlier should now be sent directly to SEO SARD, and there's no need to create an FSC ticket for these.
Thanks for clarifying when the PFA interim process should be followed. Where should departments go for more information on the PFA process?
For more information, departments can refer to Job Aid Fiscal 440.
Is there anything else PFA related that departments should know regarding Cvc-Vac exceptions?
One more thing is that as a best practice, departments should remember to set up federal AR items for their TC30 federal drawdowns. If they don't do that, then the TC30 will be posted to the default program 9998 and will need to be reclassified out in a timely manner so that transactions don't go into Cvc-Vac exception.
Got it. Sounds like there's some practical things departments can do in Fiscal to not run into Cvc-Vac exceptions.
Exactly.
All right, let's go to some more questions from the audience. First question we'll get to right now is, would the Cvc-Vac exceptions have any impacts on departments' allocation journals, such as a fund would have enough appropriation but not enough cash?
For that question, it won't, because like Tony answered earlier, because there's two different budget check ledgers. So your allocation journal will hit the CC approved ledger, which is the modifier accrual. So the CV ledger is the cash ledger. The cash ledger, which is when the cash validation is happening.
So let me add a little bit onto that. So it will check the Cvc-Vac only after your PFA is summarized and certified. So when you're ready to interface to SEO, when you go to the summarization page, at only that time the Cvc-Vac will impact. So during you run the allocation, no Cvc-Vac impact, it will be budget check like Wendy said.
All right, thank you, Esther and Wendy. Go to our next question. All right, this is a follow-up to the previous journal voucher question. It is still unclear. What if a department is behind on their reclass effort and miss the ability to reclass the transaction with the same fiscal year as the original transaction? In other words, the only open period are in the new fiscal year. What can departments do about such a situation if reopening the old fiscal year periods are not preferred?
For this question, I will need Esther's help because it will be more a business process.
Can you repeat that question again, Cory?
Okay, so originally, Esther, we talked about how there's a lot of common exceptions in Cvc-Vac for departments who are publishing or posting journal vouchers outside of the original vouchers period. And
Okay.
so they were getting Cvc-Vac exceptions because of that. And so one of our audience members asked, please clarify how the new journal voucher can be posted within the same fiscal year as the original transaction if the accounting period from the original transaction is closed, let's say 2 years ago.
Well, I think that the first one, that what you mentioned, that it need to be in the same period, is more like a recommendation. So what happened is when you have a JV, right? The first JV. So there will be when you did the first JV, there will be some kind of the releasing of your fund or the cash. So you will have a cash go up, the cash basis appropriation go up. If you don't do the correction or the reclass journal right away, whatever your increase cash appropriation may be used up by other transactions, like either voucher or stuff. So that's more like a recommendation, right? So you have a JV voucher in the previous year, but it's already closed. Practically you can do that, right? But when we talk about the reclass, normally it should happen within a month. If you're talking about the correction of the previous transaction, in this case, a journal voucher, in the prior year, yes, that is, it can be happen in the same year or same month. So it's a different situation. The one that the team talking about is that it need to be happening in the same month. We are talking about the reclass, not the correction. So reclass, you should be able to reclass right away. So it's kind of more like a good business practice.
Okay, thank you. We'll get on to our next question now. How will Cvc-Vac errors appear when running labor? Will it be on the budget error query?
Oh, after running allocations, you shouldn't have, it wouldn't budget check against the Cvc-Vac ledger. It's only like Esther said when you submit the PFA summarization page.
Okay, thank you. Go on to the next question. If we reclassed a deposit that was interfaced in period 7 and period 8, would it cause CV problem?
No, it shouldn't, because you're only doing reclassing to a department level chart field.
Thank you. Next question. Will the errors delay any month-end close activities, closing modules?
Yes, it will, because it needs to be clear before they can close up the periods.
Okay. So Cvc-Vac needs to be closed before you close your mech. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, next question. If the appropriation is set to track with, under what scenario will an AP voucher workflow be reset by Fiscal, SCO due to NSF?
For that sample that we were talking about, it was for the federal fund department that's CMIA. So for those departments and with their CMIA federal fund appropriation, those will be set as track with. In that case, it will pass the budget check and post in Fiscal with a warning, but when it goes over to legacy, that means department would have to have done the federal drawdown. So if there's no federal drawdown, then even though it passed in Fiscal, it's going to be NSF when it gets over to legacy.
So in this case, I can give everyone a quick reminder that the Cvc-Vac budget check is in addition to the SCO budget check. And so I think really the intent of having Cvc-Vac upfront is to reduce the NSFs you get. And Breanna gave the example with AP earlier. All right, so I'd like to, we've covered all the audience questions. There's still going to be time for audience questions. So if you have any, please go ahead and ask and we'll cover that. In the meantime, I think it's important that we get some feedback on the new format. This is something that was a little bit different. Just to give some background on why we changed it up. We went and we analyzed how our overall approach to town halls have been. And what we did was we came up with kind of, we decided to pilot more of like a podcast style. Originally, we weren't intending to share any of the questions, but we got some feedbacks, that I think some of the audience may enjoy being able to see kind of what we're talking through. It's still, I think, a work in progress as we start to polish it out and make sure that we are being helpful to you. And so I think that's something that if you can give us kind of the metrics about, let me switch the slide actually, I think do that. Okay. So you'll go ahead and you'll be able to rate us on a 1 to 5 scale for all of these. We're not going to share the results now, but we do use this data to make improvements into our overall process. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're keeping the information short and sweet and easy to digest for you guys, so that way you actually enjoy coming on to these and you learn from them. All right, so we do have one more question. So as you guys kind of fill out the feedback, which we really appreciate, I'll go ahead and ask that to our panel. So what's the difference between reclass and correction?
So a reclass is just when a journal or vouchers get interfaced to SEO, you would just reclass it to your departmental chart fields. But a correction is you're moving appropriation between cross E and Y, fund, or program, and that needs to get routed to SEO for approval, so it can hit legacy.
Okay, thank you. That was good. And I think that comes down from the fact that SCO Legacy only has chart fields at that higher summary level, and
Yeah.
Fiscal has that detailed level. So,
That's correct.
right. Okay. So like I was saying, we got some, basically when we were going through all of our slides, it might have been a little bit too detailed, and we wanted to make sure that we kept this at a high level. So it looks like we're getting some good feedback. Otherwise, if we don't have any more questions, we'll keep the feedback open. And I think we're going to stay on for about 5 more minutes after we stop getting questions. After this, I have one more kind of free feedback slide that if you'd like to give us, more feedback or more detailed feedback, anything we can improve on. So I'm going to go ahead and move it. Thank you for everybody who is responding. Like I said, we do use all of these. This is something that we measure every time to make improvements to overall how these are run, and then make recommendations for our Fiscal TV team, because they've been doing a lot of this based on what we're seeing. Okay. So I'll go on. And so now you guys can give us kind of what we did well today, what we could improve upon for the next town halls. And then I'll get into a few more audience questions. All right, so the next question is, what is SCO's anticipated timeline for responding to agencies to resolve these errors and issues so that MEC is not impacted?
When there's a case open, we work with our team to try to resolve it as soon as possible, so it's not holding up the MAC closing process for the department.
But to add, I think it's usually based on a first in, first out. So we go on that list.
Okay, thanks. I mean, generally, SCO is doing their best to make sure that departments can close months, but those are for the other exceptions. And we did mention earlier that if you did get an exception, you can always send a ticket that is preventing you from transacting. You can always send a ticket to the FSC, and they'll do their best to prioritize as availability occurs. But I know that the team is working hard to get those done on a regular basis. And we also have the true NSFs, which are going to be the department's responsibility for resolving.
Hey, Cory, can I add something here? So yes, if you have a Cvc-Vac error, it will impact. However, it's depending on the transaction. So I can tell you that, for example, if it's a deposit, like a direct journal deposit, right? And then it will show you anything that showed up in the month-end query, right? So deposit can show up in your month-end query, and then journal voucher. If you have a Cvc-Vac error, journal voucher will show up in the month-end query. So that's the reason they are saying that it will impact the month-end closing. So, but let's think about the voucher, right? So the voucher, Cvc-Vac check happen at the pay cycle, right? So when we do the month end, we don't really look at the pay cycle, depending or not, as long as voucher is posted, so you can still close it. So I just want to add on to that. It has to be depend on the type of the transaction where the Cvc-Vac check error is happening. If it's impacting your existing month-end checklist in the query, yes, it will impact the month-end closing.
Okay, thanks, Esther. So we have another question. What is Cvec again?
It stands for Cash Validation Appropriation Control. So it's checking, validating the authority of the appropriation.
Okay. And that's in comparison to the cash validation?
The cash validation is budget checking against the statewide cash availability.
Okay.
Not, yeah.
All right, and then we have the next question is, does it mean reclass only for internal and correction has to, or I think they're asking what does it mean? Reclass only for internal and correction has to route to SEO for approval.
So for reclass, it's just reclassing to departmental chart fields like reporting structure, service location, whereas the corrections, you're moving appropriation, like, you know, program, reference, E&Y, or fund.
And maybe to add on to that, if you're making changes to the appropriations in SEO legacy, typically that has to route for approval. Is that correct, Tone?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. So it looks like we've gotten some feedback. We're gonna, like I said before, we'll stay on as questions come in and give you guys enough time to keep asking questions. As the questions start, stop coming in, we'll go ahead and close. I want to say thank you for everybody who has responded to our feedback. It looks like we've got 9 responses for the what we could do better, what we could improve upon. And we do have a new question that just came in. All right, so we'll go ahead and ask this one. We draw down 3 days before schedule pay date for CMA vouchers. Will this affect the Cvc-Vac when payables processes federal fund vouchers and our drawdowns?
No, it won't, because for CMIA appropriation, those will be set as track width.
All right, we have one more question. Does the reclass need to be approved by SEO?
Usually reclass doesn't, because it's only with departmental chart field. The correction is what needs to get routed to SEO.
Yeah, so we're getting some questions that not necessarily related to Cvac or Cvc-Vac, but we have one more around reclass. Does it matter to do the reclass using the primary user ID or the secondary user ID? I think that would depend on the module, right?
This one maybe Esther can help, but I believe the secondary ID is only for accounts payable. So staff should be using that for doing the incumbency liquidation. Am I correct?
That is correct. So secondary ID is only for the AP module. However, I believe that has been taken away already. So starting from the fiscal year 2020, there's no catch-up anymore. There's no such thing as secondary ID. So what is going to happen is a system with either module, either AP or AR module. When you're doing the reclass from the back-end system, we check it. Is there any changes in appropriation? If there is no changes in appropriation, even though you don't use a secondary ID, it will not route to SEO for approval. So it's what we're exactly looking at is a changes in appropriation. So what the reclass that we are referring to is like Tom said, that it is a departmental reclass. You want to, so when the interface come in, you see the SEO default chart fee value. Now you want to reclass it to the departmental chart fee value. So the assumption is that you should not have any changes at the appropriation level, at the fund level, at the appropriation level. So therefore, as long as there is no changes in appropriation level, it should not route to SEO for approval.
Okay. Thank you. We have one more question. Is track width an all or nothing option? Meaning, can you pick certain funds, or is it set all funds if you have some CMIA funding?
That one is by appropriation. So if the appropriation is deemed as CMIA, that appropriation will be set as track width.
Okay. And we have one more. Esther, this one's aimed at you. And I don't know if it's really Cvc-Vac related, so let us know, Esther.
Okay, sure.
If a department needs to liquidate PO encumbrance, a $0 regular voucher needs to be created using a secondary ID. It's still available even fiscal year 2020?
I need to check that one. We need to get that back to you on that one because there are a lot of changes with the secondary ID in the fiscal year 2020.
Mm-hmm.
We confirm that.
Okay. So the next question is, who are the JIDs routed to SCO for approval when department is reclassifying? Or why are they? Even if there are no changes to the appropriation.
If it's reclassing just with departmental chart fields, then it shouldn't have routed for SEO to approval. I don't know what happened, but yeah, it shouldn't have routed to SEO for approval if it's just a reclass.
It also depends, so let me add on this one. It's also depend on the journal source that you are using, right? So if you are not using correct journal source for the reclass, it will route to SEO for approval, even though there's no changes in the appropriation.
Yeah, I think if you're seeing something that you feel like it shouldn't be acting the way it is, I recommend you open up a ticket with the Fiscal Service Center, and they can kind of provide you guidance. Maybe it's a source, or maybe the system isn't operating the way it should be. But they'll be able to help out with if you can give them specific IDs and everything. Okay. All right. So then we have one more. For federal funds, do we now have to do a drawdown when payables process a voucher? We usually draw after they process a voucher and it gets approved by SCO.
For this question, we will need more information. So like I said, if this is the CMIA department, the appropriation is not controlled. It will be set as track with. Sorry, go ahead.
So I think I can answer it if I understand the question correctly. So I think they are asking that, do I need to draw down first before I create the voucher? Because in the past, they create the voucher first, then draw down. So if that is a question, then the answer is no, you don't have to draw down first before you create the voucher. Because you're going to create the voucher first. So then when the voucher are created, you're going to have a regular budget check, right? Even though that is not a CMIA, federal fund, non-CMIA, so it's going to be controlled for Cvc-Vac. So you create the voucher first, and then you do the budget check, then SEO approve it, right? So normally you would draw down, and then you time it before your pay cycle run. So Cvc-Vac check happen, only the voucher is approved by SEO and only at the time when the voucher is ready to pay. That is where you need the money, not at the time when voucher is created before SEO approved. Hopefully that will answer the question. So there are two processes there that you create the voucher, budget check happen only at the time of the pay cycle when the voucher is ready to pay. That is where Cvc-Vac check happen. That is when you need the money from the Fed.
All right, thank you, Esther. We got a comment from one of the users who said the secondary user ID is no longer applicable for creating catch-up journal vouchers, or I think just vouchers.
Yeah, that is my understanding too. But there will be some kind of the changes there, so we'll confirm that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have one more comment or one more question for reclass of expenditure. Should we do that in AP module or GL module?
So it just depends on if it interfaces to GL, then I would suggest to fix it in GO. If it's an AP, then AP, of course. So that it's easier to audit. Like when you run a query, if it's for the AP module, then it picks up all the, the reclassification, and then if it's a GO, yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. One more question just came in. If we verify we have enough cash, but the system shows as NSF, and I assume they mean Cvc-Vac there, there's like an exception, who do we need to contact to correct the issue?
You can submit a ticket to FSC and just make sure in the subject line, just put Cvc-Vac, NSF, or yeah, just have the Cvc-Vac in your title.
All right. Thanks, Tom. Okay, we have 11 more minutes in the town hall. We're happy to support as long as we still get questions. If we close the town hall and you still have questions about Cvc-Vac, you can go ahead and contact the Fiscal Service Center at 1-855-347-2250 and Fiscal Service Center at fiscal.ca.gov. You can do that by email. And I just want to remind everybody that we go live with Cvc-Vac on March 8th. Not go live, but this group. So this will be the final group of departments that has not yet been activated. So Cvc-Vac has been live in Fiscal for a while. The team has been monitoring, as of now, all of your funds and appropriations have been set to track with. And so the team has been monitoring that to make sure that everybody is prepared to go to be activated. And so activation will happen on 3/8, and you'll get a communication the day of to confirm. All right, so we are getting a few more questions. Next question I'll answer or ask is, what query would you recommend to pull our SCO cash balances on a daily basis? Is that the just going to the CV ledgers?
Yeah, so if it's referring to the cash ledger exception, we don't have a query right now, and I believe finance is in the process developing a query to capture all the cash exception transaction.
Okay, so hi Wendy, Esther again. So let me add to that. If I understand correctly, the question you say, where can they find the cash balance, CV balance, right? The cash balance. So if we are talking about the real, the real-time balance at the SEO, that process does not change. You still go to the SEO prompt or SEO mainframe to check the daily balance at the SEO. If we are talking about the CV balance for that particular fund cash balance, 1140 balance, so you can go to the CV ledger for that fund. Right? Is it like a kind of the commitment control? You go to the CC prop, go to the CC detail, CC prop, that's where you find your budget, correct? So if you want to know the CV balance of that fund, then you will go to the CC detail and CV ledger. And then the only thing is a CV ledger, the 1140 cash is always at the state level. So you will not see the 1140 portion of your BU. So when you go to the CV ledger, the BU that you want to use is a statewide BU, 0000. So you probably don't, some department don't have the access to the statewide BU 000. However, there was a call sending out to the department that if you need the statewide BU access, you are supposed to create the email, the secondary user ID, second user ID, and then request it to Fiscal, and then we give you the access. So once you finish this training, and then check on the CV ledger and see if you have access to the statewide BU. So that is how you're going to check the CV balance, the cash balance of a particular fund. So going back to the query that when you're talking about is if I remember that you have a DFQ 13 budget exception query that we have. So currently, if you go to the production, that query only show you the CC Pro, right? Regular budget check error. It does not show you the Cvc-Vac error. So we are working on it to combine the Cvc-Vac error into the query. So what the benefit is that sometimes that you have a Cvc-Vac error, not because of the cash NSF, it's just because that you have a CC appropriation fail as well. It's depending on the type of the transaction. So for example, for the direct journal payment, because the Cvc-Vac check happened at the budget check happened, if you have a budget error, you will also have the Cvc-Vac error. So in the DFQ KK13, you will see the whole picture of whether it is a budget failing, whether it is a Cvc-Vac failing. The only disadvantage of the query is that unlike the dashboard, you can drill it down. So if you want to drill it down, you have to go to dashboard. If you want to see the overall picture, both Cvc-Vac and budget, you can go to the DFQ KK13 query. Okay, back to you, Cory.
Thank you, Esther.
Sure.
Cory, you're mute.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Esther. We had a question asking us to provide the Fiscal job aid for reclassifications. We got a lot of questions on it today. And so I posted it. It's Fiscal 451, and I put a link for everyone to see. We also had a question, what is the name of the query to capture all of the expenditures that are created in AP and GL module? I actually believe that the query is in that job aid, but if you guys have one on the top of your head that you'd like to share.
You can run the DFQ KK, I believe 01, that captures everything that hits commitment control.
Okay. All right, it looks like we don't have any more questions, so I think this will be I think if you have any more questions, this is the time to get the last minute ones in before we close out our session. All right, well then we'll go ahead and close our session. Thank you everyone for attending today. Really appreciate it. I really appreciate the feedback that you guys give us. And then we'll look forward to presenting again if anything changes, and look forward to the March 8th activation date. Remember, you'll see a communication, or at least your department liaison will see a communication letting you know that it's live, and so you can reach out to them on March 8th. And as far as we could tell, it looks pretty good for that date. All right, thank you everyone. Have a great day.